The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, but to Samuel Carter, it reeked of something uglier: prejudice. He stood at the defendant's table, his 78-year-old frame trembling not from fear but from the weight of a lifetime spent fighting. Today, he faced a judge who'd already decided his guilt before a word was spoken. "You people always have an excuse," Judge Harold Grayson sneered, his voice slicing through the tense air. The gallery gasped, a ripple of shock spreading like wildfire. Samuel's eyes, deep and weathered, locked onto the judge's, unyielding despite the venom. This wasn't just a traffic violation hearing, it was a battleground, and Samuel was no stranger to war. The year was 2025, and though the world claimed progress, the sting of racism still lingered like a bruise that refused to heal. Samuel, a black man born in the Jim Crow South, had seen it all: segregation, slurs, and systems rigged to keep him down. Yet here he was, in a Chicago courtroom, accused of running a red light he hadn't run, facing a judge whose smirk dripped with disdain. The charge was trivial, but the subtext was heavy. Samuel's very existence seemed to offend Grayson. "Do you even understand the law, Mr. Carter?" Grayson leaned forward, his tone mocking. "Or is this another case of you thinking you're above it?" The words landed like a slap, and the courtroom fell silent, every eye on Samuel. His daughter, Lena, sat in the front row, her fists clenched, her heart pounding with fury and fear. She knew her father's story, knew the weight he carried, but would this room ever see it? Samuel straightened, his cane tapping softly against the floor. "I understand the law better than most, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, deep, and resonant. The judge chuckled, a sound that grated like sandpaper. "Oh, enlighten us, then," Grayson said, folding his arms. "What's a man like you know about justice?" The gallery stirred. A young lawyer, barely out of law school, whispered to her colleague, "This is bad." An older woman in the back clutched her purse, her eyes darting between Samuel and the judge. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every word. Lena's breath hitched, begged her father to let this go, to pay the fine and walk away. But Samuel Carter didn't walk away from fights. Not in 1963, when he marched in Selma. Not in 1975, when he argued his first case. And not now. "Your Honor," Samuel began, his voice rising like a preacher's, "I've spent my life studying justice, fighting for it, bleeding for it." He paused, letting the words settle. "I was there when the Voting Rights Act passed. I was there when men like you said I didn't belong in a courtroom unless I was sweeping it." The judge's smirk faltered, just for a moment, but Samuel pressed on. "I know the law because I helped shape it." Grayson's face reddened. "You're out of line, Mr. Carter. This is a simple traffic case, not a soapbox for your stories." He banged his gavel, but the sound was drowned by murmurs from the gallery. A young black man in the back stood up, his phone raised, recording. "Let him speak," he shouted, and others echoed him. The room was a powder keg, and Samuel held the match. Lena's eyes burned with tears. She knew what was coming: her father's trump card, the one he'd kept hidden for decades, not out of shame but out of humility. Samuel reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. The judge scoffed, assuming it was a ploy. "What's this? A prop for your performance?" Grayson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Samuel didn't answer. He pulled out a small, worn velvet box and opened it. Inside gleamed a ring, its gold surface etched with the seal of the United States Supreme Court. The room fell silent, the air sucked out as if by a vacuum. Grayson's eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly. The young lawyer gasped, her pen clattering to the floor. Even the bailiff, a stoic man who'd seen it all, leaned forward. "This," Samuel said, holding the ring aloft, "was given to me in 1987, when I clerked for Justice Thurgood Marshall." His voice trembled, not with weakness but with the weight of memory. "I was the first black clerk in his chambers. I worked on cases that changed this country. So, Your Honor, don't tell me I don't know the law." The gallery erupted. Lena covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The young man with the phone shouted, "That's right," as others clapped, their voices a chorus of defiance and pride. Grayson banged his gavel again, his face now a mask of fury and embarrassment. "Order," he bellowed, but the room was beyond his control. Samuel didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the bench, his cane steady, his eyes burning. "You mocked me because of my skin, my age, my place in this world. But I've stood before men greater than you and won. I'm not here to beg for your mercy, I am here to demand your respect." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Grayson's hands shook as he gripped his gavel, his authority unraveling. The young lawyer scribbled furiously, her colleague whispering, "He's a legend." The older woman in the back wiped her eyes, nodding as if she'd always known Samuel was more than he seemed. Lena stood, unable to stay seated any longer. "That's my father," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "He's fought for justice his whole life, and you don't get to tear him down." The gallery roared again, a wave of support that crashed over the judge's bench. Grayson's face was a storm cloud, but he said nothing, his silence an admission of defeat. The case itself was almost forgotten in the heat of the moment. The traffic violation, a $200 fine for a red light Samuel swore he'd stopped at, was a flimsy pretext, a symptom of a deeper disease. Samuel had been pulled over by an officer who'd seen his gray hair, his black skin, and assumed he could be bullied. The ticket was a power play, and Grayson's mockery was its echo. But Samuel Carter was no one's pawn. He turned to the gallery, his ring still in hand. "This isn't about a ticket," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "It's about what's right. It's about every time someone like me is told to sit down, shut up, or know their place. I've been fighting that fight since I was a boy, and I'll fight it until my last breath." The room was electric, every heart pounding in rhythm with his words. Even the bailiff, trained to stay neutral, nodded slightly, his eyes soft with respect. The young man with the phone was still recording, his video already spreading across X, where it would soon rack up millions of views. Hashtags like "Justice for Samuel" and "Supreme Court Clerk" began trending within the hour. Grayson cleared his throat, his voice strained. "Mr. Carter, this court will take your statement under advisement. The charge is dismissed." He banged his gavel one last time, but it was a hollow sound, drowned by the gallery's cheers. Samuel didn't smile, he didn't need to. He'd won something bigger than a case. As he walked out of the courtroom, Lena at his side, the crowd parted like a sea. Strangers reached out to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him they'd seen the video, that they believed in him. Samuel nodded, his face calm but his heart full. He'd spent his life proving his worth, and today, he'd done it again. But the story wasn't over. Outside, reporters were already gathering, their cameras flashing as Samuel emerged into the Chicago sunlight. The video of his stand was going viral, sparking debates across the country. Some called him a hero, others, a troublemaker. On X, posts ranged from, "Samuel Carter is an American icon," to, "Just another guy playing the race card." The truth, as always, was more complex, but Samuel didn't care about the noise. He cared about the next fight. That night, Lena sat with him at their small kitchen table, the Supreme Court ring between them. "You didn't have to do that, Dad," she said, her voice soft. "You could have let it go." Samuel smiled, his eyes crinkling. "If I let it go, who's gonna stand up next time?" He picked up the ring, turning it in his hands. "This isn't just a ring, Lena. It's a promisito, keep fighting, no matter how old I get, no matter how tired." Lena nodded, her throat tight. She'd grown up hearing her father's stories, the marches, the threats, the victories. But today, she'd seen him in a new light, not just as her father, but as a man who'd shaped history, one stubborn step at a time. The next day, the story exploded. National news outlets picked it up, with headlines like "Elderly Black Man Shuts Down Racist Judge" and "Supreme Court Clerk's Viral Stand." Activists organized rallies, demanding Grayson's resignation. Legal scholars debated the implications of a judge's bias on the bench. And in Chicago, a small community group started a fundraiser to cover Samuel's legal fees, though he had none, since he'd represented himself. Samuel didn't seek the spotlight, but it found him. He agreed to one interview, with a local black-owned newspaper, where he spoke not of himself but of the work still left to do. "Justice isn't a destination," he said. "It's a road. And we're all still walking it." Back in the courtroom, Grayson faced his own reckoning. The viral video had caught the eye of the Judicial Review Board, and whispers of an investigation began to swirl. He issued a public apology, claiming his words were misinterpreted, but the damage was done. His reputation, once ironclad, was now a question mark. For Samuel, the victory was bittersweet. He'd won the battle, but the war against prejudice, against systems that judged him before he spoke, was far from over. He put the ring back in its box, tucking it into his pocket. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder. As he walked through his neighborhood, kids on the corner waved, calling him Justice Sam. He laughed, the sound rich and warm. Lena, beside him, linked her arm through his. "Your trouble, you know that," she said, grinning. "Always have been," Samuel replied. "Always will be." Samuel Carter's stand in the courtroom wasn't just a moment, it was a spark. The video of his confrontation with Judge Grayson spread like wildfire across X, racking up tens of millions of views within days. Posts flooded in, some hailing Samuel as a symbol of resistance, others accusing him of grandstanding. The nation was split, and the fault lines of race, justice, and power were laid bare. Samuel, however, wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing something bigger, a chance to shift the tide. In the days that followed, Samuel's small Chicago home became a hub of activity. Community organizers knocked on his door, asking him to speak at rallies. Young activists, inspired by his defiance, started a petition to remove Grayson from the bench. Lena, ever protective, tried to shield her father from the chaos, but Samuel welcomed it. "If they're talking, they're thinking," he told her one evening, his voice calm but firm. "And if they're thinking, maybe they'll change." The media frenzy grew relentless. National outlets camped outside Samuel's modest brick house, their vans clogging the street. Lena fielded calls from CNN, MSNBC, and even a producer from a late-night talk show who wanted Samuel to tell his story to America. Samuel declined most interviews, but he agreed to one with a young journalist from the Chicago Defender, a black-owned paper he'd read since childhood. "I'm not here to be a celebrity," he told her, sitting in his worn armchair, the Supreme Court ring glinting on the table. "I'm here to remind folks what justice costs." The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Maya, listened intently as Samuel recounted his life. Born in Alabama in 1947, he'd grown up under the shadow of segregation, where "separate but equal" was a cruel lie. He'd watched his father, a sharecropper, work himself to death for pennies. He'd walked miles to a one-room schoolhouse, dodging taunts from white kids who threw rocks. Yet even as a boy, Samuel had a fire in him, a belief that the law, if wielded right, could bend toward justice. That fire led him to law school, to clerking for Thurgood Marshall, to a career defending the defenseless. Maya's article, published a week later, was titled "The Man Who Carried Justice in His Pocket." It went viral, too. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson's world was crumbling. The Judicial Review Board launched a formal investigation into his conduct, citing potential bias in the courtroom. Ex-posts dug up old cases where Grayson had been accused of unfair rulings, particularly against minority defendants. A local law professor tweeted, "Grayson's mockery of Samuel Carter wasn't a one-off, it's a pattern." The hashtag #ResignGrayson trended alongside Justice for Samuel, and protests outside the courthouse grew louder. Grayson, once untouchable, was now a pariah, his name synonymous with everything wrong with the system. But Samuel didn't gloat. He'd seen too many battles to believe one victory ended the war. Instead, he focused on the community. He started visiting local schools, telling kids about the law, about Thurgood Marshall, about the power of standing up. "You don't need a ring to fight," he'd say, holding up the Supreme Court ring before tucking it away. "You just need a spine." The kids listened, wide-eyed, some sketching his ring in their notebooks, others asking how they could be lawyers someday. Lena, meanwhile, grappled with her own role. She'd spent years as a nurse, caring for others, but her father's stand had awakened something in her. She began organizing community forums, inviting lawyers, activists, and everyday people to discuss justice and systemic racism. The forums were packed, with voices ranging from angry to hopeful. One night, a young man stood up, his voice shaking. "I got stopped by the cops last week, just like Mr. Carter. What do I do when the system's against me?" Lena looked to her father, who nodded. "You keep going," Samuel said simply. "You find allies, you learn the law, and you don't let them break you." The ripple effects of Samuel's stand reached beyond Chicago. In New York, a law student started a scholarship fund in his name for aspiring black lawyers. In Atlanta, a mural of Samuel holding his ring appeared on a community center wall, captioned, "Justice Lives Here." Even in small towns, people shared his story, some inspired, others skeptical. On X, debates raged, "Samuel Carter's a hero, but did he have to make it about race?" one user posted. Another replied, "When the judge mocks you for your skin, it's always about race." The arguments were heated, but they were happening, and that, Samuel knew, was progress. Back in Chicago, the Judicial Review Board reached its decision. Grayson was suspended for 6 months, a rare rebuke for a sitting judge. The announcement came on a crisp October morning, and Samuel watched it on the news with Lena. "It's not enough," Lena said, her voice tight. "He should be gone for good." Samuel nodded, but his eyes were distant. "It's a start," he said. "Change doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces." Grayson's suspension didn't erase the pain of his words, but it sent a message: no one, not even a judge, was above accountability. The courtroom where Samuel had stood became a kind of pilgrimage site for activists, who left notes and flowers on the steps. One read, "For Samuel Carter, who showed us how to stand." Samuel, embarrassed by the attention, kept working. He took on pro bono cases, helping people like the young man from the forum navigate their own battles with the system. As winter approached, Samuel and Lena planned a community event to mark the 1-year anniversary of the courtroom incident. They called it Justice Day, a celebration of resilience and hope. The event was held in a local park, with food, music, and speeches. Maya, the journalist, emceed, her voice ringing out as she introduced Samuel. "This man," she said, "reminded us that justice isn't just a word, it's a fight we all share." The crowd cheered, and Samuel, leaning on his cane, took the stage. He didn't speak long. "I'm no hero," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "I'm just a man who's been fighting a long time. But I'm not alone. You're here. You're fighting too. And that's what keeps this world moving forward." He held up his ring, the gold catching the sunlight. "This ring doesn't make me special. It reminds me of the work we all have to do." The crowd erupted, and Lena, standing to the side, wiped her eyes. She'd always known her father was strong, but now the world knew it too. As the event wound down, kids ran up to Samuel, asking for stories about Thurgood Marshall. He laughed, telling them about the time Marshall had stayed up all night debating a case, fueled by coffee and conviction. "He wasn't perfect," Samuel said. "But he was relentless. That's what matters." That night, Samuel and Lena sat on their porch, the city quiet around them. The ring sat on the table between them, its weight a silent testament to everything Samuel had endured. "You changed things, Dad," Lena said softly. "Not just for you, but for all of us." Samuel shook his head. I didn't change enough. But I lit a spark. It's up to you, to them, he gestured toward the city lights, to keep it burning. The next morning, Samuel woke to find a letter slipped under his door. It was from the young lawyer who'd been in the courtroom that day, the one whose pen had clattered to the floor. She wrote about how his stand had inspired her to take on tougher cases, to fight for clients who'd been written off by the system. You showed me what courage looks like, she wrote. I'm carrying that with me. Enclosed was a photo of her graduating law school, her own Ringa class ring shining on her finger. Samuel smiled, tucking the letter into a drawer with the others he'd received. The world was still broken, but it was bending slowly, stubbornly, toward something better. He thought of the kids at Justice Day, the murals, the forums. He thought of Lena, carrying his fight forward. And he thought of Thurgood Marshall, who'd once told him, the law's only as good as the people who wield it. As the sun rose over Chicago, Samuel stepped outside, his cane tapping softly. The neighborhood was waking up, kids heading to school, neighbors waving. He felt the ring in his pocket, a quiet reminder of the road he'd walked and the road still ahead. Justice wasn't a destination, as he'd told Maya. It was a journey, and he was still walking. What do you think? Where does justice stand in a world divided by prejudice? Share your thoughts, because the conversation is where change begins.